Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the February 2022 Masterclass. I can't believe it's February already. It feels like we've had a full year of stuff already. Let me get my slides up. This is my favorite hour every month, and I'm so honored that you're choosing to spend your Friday morning or midday, depending on where you are, with us, with Inspired Results Group. And many of you, I think, are new to the Inspired Results Group Learning Lab. I'm Diane Lloyd. I'm the founder of Inspired Results Group. My 10-year-old business baby, I'm thinking about it now. And we created the Masterclass so that we could have an hour each month to talk about topics that are meaningful, important, and kind of going on out there in the world. So welcome to this space. I am going to get myself settled because I feel like I have lots of energy. So I'm going to take a breath. My feet are on the ground. I'm very grateful to be joining you from the Coast Salish territory of the Algonquin and Wasanich nations. For those of you that spend time with us at Inspired Results Group, you know how much I lean on the words and wisdom of Richard Wagamese. And it's been a way for me to find meaning, to invite Indigenous wisdom into our space. So Richard Wagamese, I'm going to read from Embers today. And I felt like this passage would serve us today. So I'm going to just invite you to close your eyes actually and let the words of Richard kind of soak in. Love is not always the perfection of moments or the sum of all the shining days. Sometimes it's to drift apart, to be broken, to be disassembled by life and living, but always to come back together and to be each other's glue again. Love is an act of life, and we are made more by the living. So let's be each other's glue today. Let's think about how we bring love into this space, but how do we bring love into our work? How do we bring love into our cultures? So let me just level set. Well, I just like to say a little bit about how we roll here in the Masterclass. You decided to spend an hour here, so do what you can to limit distractions and be present with yourself and be present with this community. And just be curious about the thoughts and feelings that this Masterclass evokes within you. Always encourage you to stay muted only because you may have things going on you don't want us to hear. If you can keep your camera on, we'd love to see your faces. You know we're in record mode, so whatever's shared here in the main room is recorded and shared, and I'm always so surprised at how many people watch the recording. My favorite Zoom feature, if you haven't yet discovered it, is hide self-view. So if you take the cursor in your window, 3 white dots, there is a hide self-view. So you don't have to look in the mirror for an hour, and take that tip into any other Zoom environment. We love to know what's going on for you. So drop your thoughts and insights into the chat. Any questions, we'll do our best to kind of keep our eyes on the chat. Stay curious, open, and engaged. This is a space I created for engagement and a place to experiment. And I wanted a place that I felt safe enough to fail, safe enough to experiment. And it has been just a joyful journey of learning when I got outside my comfort zone. So I hope you'll do the same. I'm going to ask you a check-in question. As we kind of practice, and I'm practicing this more and more lately, just checking in on my emotions. So developing that emotional literacy for ourselves. So as you arrive here in this masterclass, you may have rushed in from a busy morning. Just do a scan. How are you feeling? Check in with your heart. How are you feeling as you arrive into this masterclass? So connect to that word. What is that emotion? can you just drop it into the chat and let's just get a sense of the emotional energy in this space. I know I am feeling like this fluttery anticipation, could be interpreted as nervousness, and I'm choosing to interpret it as like nervous anticipation. Looking forward to what's going to unfold. Yeah. Thank you for checking in and sharing your truth here, sharing your feelings. Thank you. All right. I am also feeling so grateful that Dave, Harry, and I connected last year. And I was thinking about it, Dave, like we haven't actually known each other for very long. I met Dave in the Royal Roads Executive Coaching Program. I had the honor of mentoring Dave in his coaching. And so I've seen Dave in action. And as I started to imagine growth for Inspired Results Group and really thought about who I wanted to invite in to serve our community of leaders, Dave came to mind for lots of reasons. And he's a seasoned leader. He's passionate about mental health and psychological safety topics I'm passionate about and don't have a lot of expertise in. So I wanted to bring in someone who had that expertise. Dave talks about his two sons a lot, and so I know him to be such a loving father. And he's a supportive friend. I reached out to Dave last summer when I was going through a hard time, and man, did he show up for me. So for all those reasons, Dave, I am so delighted that you're in the Inspired Results Group community and that we're going to have a conversation together today. So let me take down the slides and invite you in to say hello.
Well, good morning, everybody. You asked how I'm feeling, Diane, and it really is excited. I've spent, I'm going to say, well, far too long in some ways, over 30 years in the mental health field in one form or another. And the reality is that I've spent a lot of that time being involved in reactive mechanisms, chasing issues, the overdose response, suicide prevention. And what is lovely now is that I'm finally in a place where we're talking about things that can be done in advance, that we can talk about things openly in a way that, quite frankly, a few years ago may not have been possible. I often think about the stigma attached to mental health and how it's often still a very, very challenging conversation. And I'm sometimes drawn back to, I grew up in the UK as I was a small lad when I moved to Canada, but I do remember that back in the day, if somebody had cancer, we wouldn't talk about the word cancer. They had the C word. And it couldn't be framed and we couldn't talk about it openly. And I gave a presentation a few years ago about mental health. And I think that we're now evolving to a point where we can talk about mental health, mental wellness in a way that we can now openly talk about cancer. There's a cancer fundraiser every week. We all know somebody's been touched by cancer. And the reality is, of course, is we all know somebody who's been touched by mental health or mental illness. And that's a challenge on an ongoing basis. It touches all of us. And now to be able to have a conversation about understanding how that's impacted in the workplace, for me is just, wow, I'm in a great place and just so delighted to be here. So thanks for this opportunity, and thanks everybody for coming today. As we talk about the role of mental health and mental wellness and psychological safety, I think, of course, the elephant in the room is the pandemic. It has changed the way that we live our lives, changed the way that we work, changed the way that we interface and interact with each other, or conversely, that we don't interact with each other, that we become increasingly isolated, alone, missing conversations, missing that social rub. And it is becoming a real issue. There's some recent data that suggested that historically, and it's been fairly constant for a number of years, that 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health crisis or situation through a year. Now that number is 1 in 4. So the numbers have increased very significantly in a very, very short period of time. And all services are being overloaded. And, I think we really need to be very clear that this is, in some vernacular, it's the echo pandemic. there was a lag when the pandemic first came down, and now we're seeing a steady growth of mental health issues. We're seeing it in children, we're seeing it in parents, of course, right across the entire population. And this is a great conversation because I think that we are finally getting to a point, and this is not my line, it's a quote from Johnny Morris, who's the CEO of the BC division of Canadian Mental Health Association. He talks about the parity of esteem. Like, won't it be great when we can talk about mental health issues with the same amount of esteem that we talk about physical health issues? Mm-hmm. And I think that we're very, very close to having that esteem now. We don't have the same funding, but we're getting there. So perhaps we can bring up the slide.
So this is how we're going to roll, folks. We're going to, Dave's going to share a little bit of content for 5 minutes or so. Then Dave and I are going to move into a conversation about creating a culture that's safe enough to fail. And then we're going to have a few minutes for Q&A. And then we're going to move you into conversations. So I've forgotten to kind of lay out how this hour is going to unfold. So there it is. So Dave, let me bring up your slides and let me know how I can support as you go.
Yeah, thank you. So I think if we're going to talk about psychological safety in the workplace, we need to actually create a context. So I believe that we need to take a look at a societal response to these issues. And I think that while often, there's some great work done by the Mental Health Commission in Canada around psychological safety and the psychological standard. But I think that sometimes we take a look at things in terms of issues around diversity, equity, inclusion. And while it's very, very important to talk about destigmatization and acceptance and acknowledgement of people's challenges and bringing them full selves to work, that's the bottom step. That's the destigmatization and acceptance. That's the floor. Every organization should be operating that way. But I think as we take a look at what we aspire to, it really is, how do we get from the floor to the ceiling? How do we acknowledge issues and challenges in regards to mental illness, but aspire to a notion of mental wellness that is a part and product of the workplace? So I'm going to go through this somewhat quickly because I could talk a lot. So destigmatization, we know that's a big issue. People need to be able to show up fully. They don't get to hang their illness or their challenges on a hook as they walk through the door and then pick them up as they go home. They're there all the time, and it's important that we recognize that, support them through that process, engage in mental health first aid, check in and make sure that folks are doing okay. We need to ensure that there's improved access to services. So whether that's through employee assistance programs, improved access to insured services, and quite frankly, access to good quality counseling services. I think if I were to do this slide again, I would say that little staircase would be a landing on the acknowledge the role of the employer in contributing to mental wellness. Because the issue there is not only is the employer contributing to mental wellness, they can contribute to mental illness in terms of creating stressors in the workplace, added challenges and issues around bullying, overworked, exhaustion, all of those things need to come into place. And the employer is just part of being society, needs to show up and understand what it is that they're doing. It's not separate and apart from them, but truly a part of their DNA too. So part of that then is to deliberately create a culture of safety. And part of the way to do that is to lean into leaders as coaches. We're all responsible for providing that support, being curious ourselves, and being curious about the teams that we lead. So the responsibility continuum, and those are distinct elements, but of course they all blur. They're all kind of a very long Venn diagram. We have societal issues right up to the role of the individual. So I think this is ultimately, we can't lean into leaders coach unless we also focus on the destigmatization and create that safe place for people to come to work. So we have to understand that larger context. You can take that down now, Dan.
Fantastic. Did you want to just touch on this definition before we
Yeah, you bet. So this is Amy Edmondson is considered the one of the leading, if not the leading thinker on psychological safety. And you can read the slide yourself. I think that, when we talk about psychological safety, it's about, particularly in the knowledge economy, where ideas are the differentiating strategy of all organizations. It doesn't matter if you're in education or if you're an NGO or if you're a for-profit, where ideas people. And if people are afraid to speak up, if people are afraid to offer an idea or suggestion or call out bad practice, then we don't have psychological safety. And those companies and those organizations will not move ahead. They will stagnate. They will lose people. They will lose ideas, and everybody's worse off as a result. All right, that's it. That's the intro.
Indeed. Okay, so we're going to move into the fishbowl, which is a facilitation method where, so Dave and I are getting in the fishbowl. We're going to have a conversation about culture and failure, and you're all outside the fishbowl observing. So that's the intention behind this. And then we're going to get out of the fishbowl and we're going to ask for some questions, because I have a feeling this will spark a lot of questions. Dave and I had a couple of pre-chats and have really had a hard time narrowing, what can we talk about in this massive, complex topic that will be meaningful and helpful. So Dave, with that, we wanted to unpack the notion of culture, a culture that's safe enough to fail. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, I think for me, part of the answer is to focus on what we mean by culture. And what are first of all, what are the stories people tell themselves when they show up to work about their employer, or even about the role of work? Sometimes people will take a look at things and say, well, it's what I do when I'm not at home with my family. It's a place I go or whatever. And it's an external entity. And, when we're talking about culture, is that people don't get to divorce themselves from culture. They are a part of the culture. They get to contribute to it. They get to form it and shape it. And as much as sometimes I've certainly felt that I'm an invisible number. I'm just one of the, masses showing up to work every day. The reality is, when people leave, is they leave a hole. They leave a hole in that culture. They bring energy, ideas, innovation to work. And so part of it really is how does each individual show up and choose to contribute to culture? Mm-hmm. And I would say that's one of the things that I've found sort of somewhat missing from the literature, is that there tends to be an external frame of looking at leaders and the organization and the systems within that organization. So I guess the starting point would be, how do people show up and be curious about what they contribute to the culture? How do they demonstrate issues and behavior around failure? And so the second part of that equation would be, when people fail, when they are afraid of making a mistake even, what's the language they tell themselves? What's the self-talk that goes through their head? When I make a mistake, I can have a lot of talk. Like, come on, Dave, don't be so stupid. You can do better than this. Or suck it up, buttercup, whatever. Any of those negative, negative.
Those are familiar narratives. Yeah.
Right. And I think if we take a look at how we talk to ourselves when we make mistakes, I do believe that there can be a bit of a projection in terms of how we view others. Now, we may not say it as bluntly to others when they make a mistake, but we're thinking it. And the only way that we could really, justify, well, I don't think we can ever justify talking in a callous or unkind way. But nobody's going to be perfect. Nobody has the right to say, I have all the answers. My job is perfect. And quite frankly, we know, Lena Brene Brown's work, we know that perfectionism is the enemy of innovation and growth.
Yeah. So what do leaders need to model in that space
then? I think, as much as anything, it is I think we started out the conversation today, they need to model that curiosity. They need to model how they show themselves. Are they modeling good behavior in terms of making sure that they're inviting people into the conversation. They're asking appropriate questions. I mean, sometimes I know the circumstances shift and there's a urgent, got to get it done. We got to make a snap decision. Let's go. But if people want to lead, the notion of inclusion, full participation, does everybody get a chance to speak up? Are people talking over other people at meetings? Is there space for introverts to come back after the meeting and be invited in to have a conversation and say, I was thinking about this, but they're processing it. And, you know, the extroverts are talking over everybody. And so the individual needs to be able to model that behavior for themselves. And not only model it, but declare it, set those boundaries for themselves. That's what they're expecting from others. And that's how they're going to treat others, a contribution to that culture.
Mm-hmm. I would, you know, I'm thinking about imperfection and leadership and how modeling or owning our imperfection, or talking about when we make mistakes as leaders, where we're feeling uncertain or unsure, and we're going to do something anyway. Like, what kind of signals that sends to normalize a culture of innovation and experimentation?
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on that? I know I'm way off script. You're like, Diane, you didn't tell me you were going to ask me these questions, but you know, here we go.
Well, perhaps restate the question for me then.
I'm just thinking about, as a leader, what I can model around it's okay to be imperfect, it's okay to make mistakes, and if I'm open and transparent about that as a leader, how does that infuse a culture of safety?
Well, you know, earlier I pointed out the theme that I thought was missing from the literature. The theme that runs through the literature is the whole notion of having to know. And having to know as a leader is a massive problem.
Yes.
Yeah. Where we show up, I used to be an executive director of a mental health program, and having to know everything all the time was brutal. Brutal. I mean, you know, burnout, exhaustion, fatigue, call it what you want. And, you know, there's more and more studies that are coming out that, particularly through the pandemic, that people that are being affected most, I'm not going to say it's most, but what is spiked is burnout amongst leaders.
Yeah.
Is they are expected to know.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they're pivoting all the time. There's staff shortages, there's supply shortages, there's other HR issues, there's running the business, and they're done. Yeah. And so one of the things that I think that people can model, and again, I experienced this, is ask questions, say, I don't know. Invite people in, value their opinions. And when you invite them in, be prepared to hear the response.
Mm-hmm. And things differently.
And things differently. I mean, you know, and we've all done it. You know, I think it's one of the great ironies that when we're often at our most stressed, that's when we close the door to the office, assuming we have one, or we put our headphones on in the cubicle.
Or we turn our cameras off.
We turn our cameras off and we shut the door and say, I got this. I'm going to do this. Mm-hmm. I certainly did that when, you know, when I was in healthcare, just like, I got this, like, I don't have time to, and it's like, no, that is the time that we need to literally and metaphorically open the door, invite people into the conversation. And as I said, when we're going to invite them in, we set the ground rules in terms of what that invitation looks like. It's just because I ask you in doesn't mean I will necessarily use your opinion or the opinion of 20 other people. Yeah. Here's what the decision-making process is going to look like. We thank them for that opportunity and for that engagement, and then we move forward. Mm-hmm. But it's that invitation in, that quite frankly, that humility and that curiosity to say, I don't have it. And I shouldn't have it. There's no way. I used to have 2,200 staff. There's no way I could draw down and be the lone spokesperson for those staff members and for all the people that they serve.
And it's just changing too fast for anybody to have answers. It's just not possible.
Exactly.
Anymore.
Yeah.
No. So let's talk about fear. And you talked about it earlier, the making up stories, and we get in our own way more than a culture gets in our own way, because we create a big story about what's going to happen when I take a risk or make a mistake. So we're already hooked by our own narrative. I'll let you kind of launch from there. What do you think we need to practice as a member of a culture, a member of a team?
Well, I think when you and I were talking about doing the session, we talked about how there's nowhere near enough time. This is a massive subject. But one of the things I think that we need to have open conversations about is what do we mean when we talk about mistakes, what we talk about in terms of failure, and how do we sort of rumble with that? Seth Godin talked about that, people aren't afraid of failure. What they're afraid of is being blamed. And I think that we need to sort of be very, very clear that we can create blame-free environments where it's okay to ask, it's okay to call out, if the boss is saying, hey, we're going to go do this, and, the timeline is too tight. It's like, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea versus going away and having that back chat. But people don't want to be blamed. They don't want to be singled out. And so what can happen then in terms of the fear factor is that people will not innovate. They will not challenge. And if there's no innovation, as I said earlier, there's simply no growth. So I think that, making the implicit explicit on a regular basis in terms of what failure looks like, what mistakes look like, and how those are going to be caught, how they're going to be talked about, and ultimately built upon. The other thing that goes with that in terms of that, creating that set of expectations, is creating a sense of predictability. Advertising well in advance. Here's the rules of engagement. Here's the expectation. Here's the invitation for participation. And then sticking to it and following through on that, not changing the rules every day. And I think that's, you take a look at the pandemic, the rules are changing all the time. Masks on, masks off, social distancing, whatever. I mean, that's just around public health measures. But in the workplace, those rules are changing all the time.
Yeah.
And as a result of that ever-changing environment, anxiety is through the roof.
Yeah.
Absolutely through the roof. And so the more we can make the world a safe, predictable, consistent place, we alleviate anxiety, we avoid the amygdala hijack that goes with that anxiety. Because the reality is, when there's anxiety flourishing, people feel detached, they're not thinking, they're not problem solving, and they're not engaging.
Yeah.
And I got one eye on the clock here, Diane. We have 1 minute.
I know. And I'm gonna just oh, you got a snap. Miranda likes that. So we're gonna open up for questions, and I just feel I just want to share this thought. So thank you for sparking this thought. The so many conversations I'm having with leaders, they're, so let me say this differently. We're all stressed. Our amygdalas are all coming online way more often than we'd like. Collectively, we're not functioning at our best. And I feel like I just want to say, how can we offer more compassion to one another? How can we just have more grace? Because we are going to screw up. We are screwing up. We are not at our best as leaders, as team members. And so I think part of this culture of safety is like, where's the compassion? Where's the grace as we see each other struggling to show up as a, reasonable version of myself day to day. And so there we go. Got a little soapbox moment there. I'll stop talking now. I know there's probably a bunch of questions. So we want to leave some space for questions, and we really want to leave space for you to talk to each other. If we could, because we have lots of folks here, if you could use the reactions button and put up your hand, we'll have 10 minutes for some Q&A. What questions are coming up? Tammy, come on in, Tammy. Good to see you.
Hi, Diane. Hi, Dave. Really nice to meet you. I've very much enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. I have a question about something I think I heard you say, and I'm just going to refer to my notes, which are over here. And I may not have it right, but I do have a question. And your statement was, how do people show up, and be curious about how they show up and understand how they contribute to the culture in the workplace or whatever team they're coming to. And my question for you is, how do we encourage people to do that and to create a safe place for them to do that? And perhaps even change a culture that may not be as safe as what we want it to be. That's a very loaded question, I realize, as I said that. Can you answer that in a couple of minutes for me, Dave? So as much as you can
characters.
speak.
Well, I think part of it, there's not a single conversation that goes on with a team around that. But I think part of it is to pose that question: is what are people curious about in terms of how they're showing up? What are they modeling? Because this isn't just a notion of a superior, within the hierarchy. It's not just a boss talking to a direct report. It could be peer to peer, or even an employee talking to their boss. Everybody needs to operate in a space of safety. And so if there's the discussion at the water cooler about this gossiping going on, first of all, that's not healthy. Let's have the tough conversation with somebody. But if there's the conversation going on that people just don't feel safe, they don't feel that they can speak clearly, and it's like, okay, fair enough, that may be true. But the first question is, and it's not, and again, huge challenge, because when people are at their most exhausted and the most fatigued right now, we're asking them to be at their best. Mm-hmm. Real big challenge. So how do we say, yeah, I know you're really tired, but we're going to ask you to do more. But the doing more in this particular case is what do they own? What's their stake? We talk about stakeholders, and often we think about other people, but what's their stake in making the workplace a healthy place?
I'm going to add to what Dave shared, because what's really coming up for me, Tammy, is realizing curiosity is not a natural state of being for most of us. Like our curiosity peaks at the age of 4. So this idea, when we say curiosity, I'm just so aware of all the layers to that, and how I think in this conversation, we need to educate around curiosity, practice curiosity, talk about curiosity. It's a very different way for our brains to work. And so, I think curiosity, we need to practice that and learn how to do it again. Do we move your big question forward in any small way, Tim?
You did. Thank you so much. I've got lots of notes, and my own curiosity is piqued. Thanks so much.
Well, that's good. Paula, come on in. You're patiently waiting.
Yeah. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Paula.
From the past, in a couple of organizations.
A long time.
And hi, Diane. My question, again, broad strokes. What would you say about trust in culture? As Dave and I know from one organization, lots of work, lots of paper, lots of documents, lots of things that are tangible, but how does it get actioned, and how does trust come into that?
Well, Paula,
that's a softball swing your way, Dave. Yeah.
I think that might be a different masterclass.
But important, right? I mean, if we don't have
it's hugely important. I mean, let's take it down to the most fundamental level. When people say they're going to do something, they need to be able to do it and follow through on that. They need to mean it, and again, create that consistency of anticipation. Another great line is, it's not from the DSM, but anxiety is experiencing failure in advance. And if we can eliminate the unknown. If we can shorten the narrative of the story that we tell ourselves, anxiety is going to really flatten out. And if we can flatten out, we're going to be able to think and problem solve far more clearly. And once that anxiety is gone too, is that there's a level of, perhaps, I don't know, use the word courage, but there's an increased ability to start asking questions and to go back to the people that we think, look, you gave me a direction here. I'm not sure I understand it. I need to be safe enough to be able to ask the question. But if that directive came from somebody who is laying that groundwork, inviting participation, and then, quite frankly, responding in a way that reflects that they're honoring that participation. They're not dismissing it. They're not asking for your feedback and then going, yeah, whatever, or not even attending to it. They're thanking you for it. And then they're being curious about your response. That's going to develop trust.
Thank you.
Great question, Paula. Brene Brown's research says the #1 trust building behavior at work is asking for help. Valerie, come on in. We've got time for your question, and then we'll move along and we'll try and grab, if you have questions you want to drop into the chat, everyone, we can touch on those after the breakouts. Valerie, come on in.
Oh, hi, Dave.
Hey, Val.
I found just the invite for this presentation on LinkedIn, and I have the privilege of working directly with Dave as one of his indirect reports, experiences leadership firsthand. So love the talk, lots of good conversation. Dave, I'm really struggling right now. So I think coming from a mental health background, laid the ground for relationships and have great trust in terms of allowing people to have voice. But I feel like I'm dropping the balls on administrative responsibilities because I'm putting so much effort into allowing people to speak up, express kind of what they need to, developing that trust. And I'm struggling with the balance between the administrative duties and then allowing all the work that you're talking about. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts or tips for me and how to balance those two, or strategies to cover my administrative responsibilities while still allowing the foundation for the work that needs to happen to allow the trust and all those other things that need people to feel heard and feel comfortable in the workspace.
Well, great question, Valerie. And that's the uncomfortable mantle of leadership, trying to juggle all those issues. I guess the first thing that I would suggest is that, again, similar to the conversation on culture, you're part of the culture too, and creating expectations with, whether it's your board or with whoever you report to in terms of what's manageable. I think that's really important to have that conversation, to manage their expectations in terms of what's doable. And then, going back to what I said earlier, is that it's not necessarily about a supervisor or an organization taking care of people. I think as much as anything, it's about creating the space for people to be the fullest version of themselves. And what I wonder, and without getting into the specifics, is some of those administrative duties that you have. I appreciate this as a ED, you've got to carry some of those things because of confidentiality. But I would hazard a guess that there's some of those administrative duties that you have that maybe some of your team would be delighted to help with, because it's a growth opportunity for them. And by you engaging them in that task, you're showing humility, you're showing curiosity, and you're giving them an opportunity to demonstrate their innovation and growth, which then, as they're going to make mistakes, but you get to be shifted into the role of mentor. And then you get to cultivate that as you go down the path. And then again, you've hopefully split some of your workload. So that's a very simplistic answer, and perhaps to a very complex undertaking. And if you want to connect offline, we can do that too.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. I sometimes take on more than I need to. So just the simple suggestion of delegation and empowerment within the team and being able to look at where we can use those resources, I think that's super helpful. Thank you, Dave.
Great question, Valerie. I think you spoke to many people in the room with that wonderful question. Awesome. Okay, because of time, what I would like to do, thank you, Dave, and I'll thank you again. I would like to give everyone the space. What we know about this masterclass is that some really incredible people show up and some really wonderful conversations happen when we put you together to explore a question. So how would you like to contribute to the psychological safety in your team or organization? What's one thing you're taking from this conversation that has given you something actionable to contribute to in your context? So I'm going to hand the baton over to Carmen, who's setting up the breakout rooms. We've got you with 3 to 4 people. You're going to be together for 10 minutes. Our breakout rooms are set up for a 30-second countdown when we close them. We'll come back into the main room. If we can answer any questions from the chat, we'll do that, and then we'll wrap up our time together. So enjoy the conversations. Carmen, set them free. Welcome back.
I got out. I didn't mean to escape my group.
Oh no, they're coming soon, Naomi. It's okay.
I hit the wrong button.
We've all been there. We've all been there. Amazing. Welcome back, everybody. The band is back together. Fantastic. I hope you had a wonderful conversation. You know, probably like Dave and I experienced, not enough time to explore this juicy topic. We wanted to acknowledge the question that Sheila asked. So I said to Dave, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer this really big question. So Dave, come on in with a 30-second response to a great question.
Hi, Sheila. All these blasts from the past faces. Good to see you. I can't really answer the question fully because I haven't read the book about radical candor, and that was the question: is how do we create psychological safety? And correct me if I'm getting this wrong. In the context around radical candor, did I get that right? Okay. So I guess the way I would, from what I do know about the book, it really is about making sure that people feel heard and that they have an opportunity to share their full selves. What I would say is that that doesn't mean necessarily going, blah, this is it, this is who I am, and everybody needs to hear that. It is still an opportunity for people to be curious as they engage in conversation and relationship with others, and to really turn that curiosity into them on themselves in terms of how are they showing up, what are they hoping to get from that conversation, and how do they move forward with it. Don't know if that helps or not.
So Dave got all the softball questions here in a very complex, multi-layered topic. And I really, Dave, I just want to acknowledge your vulnerability, your courage to bring such a huge topic into a tight time. And I know we're both so excited to talk more about this topic, but thank you for showing up as yourself and bringing your wisdom and your heart to the Inspired Results Group Masterclass today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All right, everybody. I am curious, what was valuable for you in this masterclass today? Drop it into the chat. What was valuable for you this morning? Let's just get some rolling inspiration here. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go back to just a couple of things I wanted to share with you before we wrap up. I am so excited about the launch of our Courageous Coaching for Leaders program. This is a program that I have been cooking in the background for many, many years. Many of you are from Edmonton Public Schools here today, and I have been working with Edmonton Public Schools and other organizations developing content for how do you become a coaching leader? How do you lead like a coach? And over the years, I've always known I really wanted to put my own brand together around that kind of learning. And I wanted to bring my Dare to Lead learning into a program. So finally, it's finally happening. And so Courageous Coaching for Leaders The first cohort that we're offering, registration is open. We'll send you a link. We talk about curiosity in this program. We teach you how to cultivate a curious mindset as a leader so that you can create connection, co-creation, let go of having all the answers and practice asking more questions and really activating the capacity of the people who work for you. So I love this program. I hope you'll think about registering if becoming a coaching leader is something that you are ready to do. The world needs us to coach more and tell less. So that's very exciting. And I also want you to know that you have the opportunity to work with Dave, to work with him one-on-one as your coach. Dave's also available for team coaching if you want to bring your team together to explore this topic of creating psychologically safe environments, to create those rules of engagement Dave was talking about. What if you could co-create those in a facilitated experience with Dave? So lots of options to engage with Dave further under the Inspired Results Group banner. We will be following up with an email later today that has links to both of those. And I think Nicole was going to drop in, it's probably there is the link to the Courageous Coaching for Leaders program right there in the chat. So I just want to end with some gratitude. I'm going to take down these slides. Dave, thank you for serving the Inspired Results Group community and bringing some of your peeps and fans. Obviously, you have some people who've been following you and were curious what you were up to here. So thank you for that. Thank you all for showing up. I hope you got something, most of all for you, out of this hour together. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend in front of you. So go have a great Friday and a wonderful weekend. Thank you for showing up. Appreciate you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.